Hey guys, welcome back. My name is Brian Winter. I'm a tax attorney, tax professor, and in this video what I am doing is I'm talking about the 1098-T, the tuition statement. So you may have received a tuition statement and you may have some issues with it. You may be looking at it saying, wait, I see the amount on the 1098-T that's saying how much I actually paid for qualifying tuition expenses, but I actually paid more. So what happens when it's not the same? So we're going to talk about that in this video. Or you may be wondering, listen, I've been paying for my child's tuition. Do I get to take the deductions with this? Do I get to get the credits, I should say, for the purposes of their tuition? Or what happens if the student took out student loans and they've been paying for their own tuition, but they're still a dependent? Who gets to go ahead and claim that on their taxes? So we're going to be going through some of those important topics. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to give you a fact pattern. I'm going to show you what a 1098-T actually looks like and what each of the boxes also mean. So that way you can see, all right, this is what is actually happening in this situation. Then what I will do is I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to do a separate video and I'm going to do the 1098-T, and you're going to be able to see the 1098-T from that fact pattern that we're working on in this video. And I'm going to carry it over to our tax credits, so that way you can see where it actually appears. So where does this information from your 1098-T go, and then how does it eventually make its way over to our 1040, so that way you know how to do this as you're working on your taxes. All right, well, let's go ahead, let's get started with some of the basics of our 1098-T. All right, so let's talk about the basics of the 1098-T, or tuition statement. Now, what happens is your academic institution is going to go ahead and it's going to mail it to you, and it's going to show the amount of tuition that you've paid, and it's going to show some of the scholarships that you received. We're going to be using this 1098 in order to determine whether we're going to be able to qualify for our different types of tax credits, our American Opportunity Tax Credit or the Lifetime Learning Tax Credit. Now, the amounts in the boxes on your 1098-T are not going to be controlling in terms of whether we qualify or not. We have to take additional steps. So when you get your 1098-T, it's an important document for you because it's dealing with your tuition that you're paying, but we need to understand it's a starting point. Now, don't disregard your 1098-T. I mean, you might be looking at it saying, well, I didn't pay that much in tuition or whatever. But I'll tell you what, if you qualify for these tax credits, that is a dollar for dollar reduction of your tax liability. That's significant. And if you qualify for the American Opportunity Tax Credit, part of it is refundable, which means that you might actually get money back even if you don't owe any taxes, right? So this is an important concept for us to be able to understand. All right, now, what happens if you didn't receive one? Well, it doesn't mean that you're not going to qualify for some of these tax credits, but what I will say is universities generally send it to all their students, but there are certain situations where a university may not have to or may not elect to send it, right? So in certain situations, non-resident aliens may not be receiving it. Another situation could be you're taking courses, but they weren't for credit, so that may not qualify, so the university may not go ahead and issue that 1098-T. Okay, now let's assume you get this 1098-T, you actually receive it, you're looking over it, and you're saying, wait, I paid way more than what the university is claiming. Hey, like I said, this is your starting point, so don't sit there and think automatically that the numbers in those boxes are going to be your controlling issue, because what may have happened is you may have been purchasing other required books, for example, and that would qualify as a qualifying educational expense. So the university may not have it listed in there, so you would still add that on because it's a qualifying educational expense. All right, so again, this is your starting point when you get that 1098-T. Now, the 1098-T is an information filing. And what happens is the university has 3 different copies of it that they're going to send out. So you're going to receive copy B. So you're receiving a copy for yourself. That's probably what you're looking at when you have that 1098 in hand, right? That's your tuition statement. Then what's going to happen is the IRS is also going to be receiving a copy of it. And then the university also maintains a copy for their own records. But these are information filings, so that way the IRS knows what information has been sent there, and they use it for matching purposes. Again, it doesn't mean that you have to have exactly what is on the 1098-T, because you may have other qualifying expenses that are going to go ahead and apply. So don't just automatically go with the numbers in the boxes. Okay, now, why do we care about the 1098-T? Again, this applies to the credit. So we're trying to determine whether we're going to be able to get a credit. So if you're watching this video and your purpose is to say, well, where does it appear on my 1040? I'm looking at my 1040 and I don't see where it appears to where I can take this deduction. Well, that's because it's not really a deduction. It's not an itemized deduction. Of course, it's not a standard deduction, and it's not an above the line adjustment like student loan interest. This is separate. This is for credits. So you're not necessarily seeing it going straight to your 1040. Now, we will see here in a little bit that it could eventually get over there with the amounts if you qualify for these credits. But what you're going to do is you're going to take a detour. You're going to go to the 8863 and you're going to fill out the 8863, and then you may have to go to a Schedule 3 for part of that, and others may go directly straight to your 1040. Now, like I said, I'm going to do a video that follows this video, and it's going to go ahead and walk you through the process, so that way you know how to deal with this as you're working through it to where you can get it back to your 1040. Okay. So let's go ahead and let's look at an actual 1098-T so we know how to handle this. Okay, so let's go ahead, let's look at our sample facts so that way we can then go ahead and take a look at the actual 1098-T that Tina would actually receive from her academic institution, example State University in this scenario, which remember the IRS is also receiving a copy of it as an information filing. So what happens is we have Tina Carter. Her school is going to be Example State University. Her qualified tuition paid is going to be $8,500. The tuition refund during the year, she's going to have a $500 refund for whatever reason. She got that $500 refund. She had scholarships of $3,000. So the scholarships are going to go ahead and it's going to reduce the amount of our educational expenses that we're going to be able to take for purposes of those two academic educational credits. She didn't have any prior year tuition adjustments, and that's generally going to be none. Prior year scholarship adjustments, nothing with that. And again, that's kind of unusual to have. Spring 2027 tuition included. Then what we're going to be looking at is at least half-time, and is she a graduate student? So let's look at a few things on here before we go to the 1098-T. So when you see that spring 27 tuition included, when you're looking at the 1098-T, what happens is this is based upon an academic year, or sorry, a calendar year and not an academic year. So when you're looking at the 1098-T, when you actually pay the tuition could make a difference. If you paid it in December of the current year for the spring semester, for the January through May term, well, then that's going to appear on your calendar year. So that would be on your 1098-T. So the spring tuition included is saying, yeah, they probably paid it in December, so they paid it even though they haven't yet started that semester, so they paid it early. If they didn't pay it until January, then you wouldn't have that amount there, right? You wouldn't have that. Okay. The other thing that's on here is you're seeing the half-time student and the graduate student. Those are both going to be important as it relates to our American Opportunity Tax Credit, because you have to be taking that as an undergraduate student and you have to be enrolled at least half-time in order for those to qualify. Now, if you were a graduate student or you weren't enrolled at least half-time, what you might do is you might look at the lifetime learning credit, right? So in that credit, then you're going to be able to go ahead and still take the tax credit. The tax credits are a little bit different. And I have a separate video that walks you through those tax credits of what they mean and do you qualify for those tax credits. So if you're trying to figure out those two tax credits, make sure you're taking a look at my other video on it. So what we'll do from this point on is we're going to go ahead, we're going to look at the actual 1098-T, and then in the next video, I'm going to take that 1098-T and I'm going to help you trace it, how it gets back to your 1040, so you can go from the 1098 to whatever forms you have to deal with, like the 8863, and then we're going to work our way back over to the 1040. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the 1098T. All right, so here's what our 1098T looks like, and this is for 2026. Of course, things will change every year, so they're always going to look pretty similar to this, though. Okay, so here's what we're looking at. So on the left-hand side, we're going to see that we start out with the filer's name, right? So what we're going to deal with is we're dealing with example state university. So we're dealing with your university here. So if you're going to say Ohio State University, you'd have Ohio State University. If you're New Mexico State University, you're New Mexico State University. And then it's going to be the university's street address, right? So what we have here is Academic Way, for example. So you're going to see that that's already going to be listed on there. It's going to give the university's information on there. It's going to go ahead and it's also going to be giving their telephone number and the employer identification number. So that's all coming from the university stuff. Now what you're going to have is a taxpayer's tax identification number. Now yours is probably going to be XXX-XX- and then your last four numbers of your social security number. That's probably what's going to be appearing on yours, but generally it's going to be a social security number, but it's a taxpayer identification number. Now to get the tax credits this year, what you have to have though is a social security number. It doesn't have to be on this 1098T, but that is a new requirement under the American Opportunity Tax Credit and our educational tax credits. Okay, so let's continue ahead with this. So after you have that information, you're looking at the student's name. Okay, so you have Tina Carter here, and then you're going to have Tina's address, and we're saying it is One Fine Place in Tallahassee, Florida. And then we're going ahead and we have the account number here, which may be included when the university went ahead and sent this to you. Now, let's clarify something here that I told you during the introduction we were going to talk about. So, who actually gets to take this tax credit, right? So, we're going through the 1098T, and the whole purpose for this is to determine whether we're going to be able to take a tax credit, whether it's the American Opportunity Tax Credit or the Lifetime Learning Tax Credit. Okay, so is it the student who is going to be taking it? Is it the parent who's going to be taking it? Or is it the person who's actually going to be paying the tuition that takes this may be able to take the tax credit, right? So is this information more for the student or the parent, I guess is what I'm trying to ask you. Here's the thing. What it really comes down to is whether the student is going to be claimed as a dependent or not. It's not so much who is actually paying the cost or the tuition. It is who is actually claiming the student. So let's look at a couple scenarios. Let's say that we have the parent who is going ahead and they're paying the tuition, and the student is a dependent. Who gets to take the tax credits if they qualify? That is going to be the parents. So the parents will be looking at it saying, yes, American Opportunity Tax Credit, dollar for dollar reduction, I love it. They're going to be the ones who are going to be looking at it, assuming that they qualify. We have income thresholds and all that stuff. Okay, now let's say that student takes out some student loans and they're using those loans to pay their tuition and educational expenses, qualifying educational expenses. But they are claimed as a dependent on their parents' taxes. So they meet the definition of a qualifying child. So the parents have the right to claim them. All right, in that situation, parents get to take the tax credit, okay, if they qualify. Again, because of the income limits and all that stuff. But it's because the student is being claimed as a dependent that really controls, even though the student's the one who's making the payments on it, right? Or if grandparents are making the payments for the student, parents get to claim them. If the parents get the credit if the parents are claiming the student as a dependent. Now, let's say parents are going ahead and paying the tuition, right? But they cannot claim the student as a dependent. Student gets to take the credits. So it depends on whether the student is being claimed as a dependent or not. That's the focus that we're really focused on. That determines who's going to be able to take or claim this student. Okay, one other thing I want to mention with that, just real quick, is that the decision on whether the parent can claim the student, I mean, it's determined by law. So a parent cannot sit there and say, you know what, my income is going to be too high, so I think it would be better that I don't claim you this year and you claim yourself so you can take the American Opportunity Tax Credit. That's not how the whole thing works. The question is, can the parents claim the student as a dependent? And if they have the right to claim them, then the student may not claim themselves, even if the parents choose not to claim the student as a dependent. Okay? So it's not a decision between the parent and the student. It's a decision as to, do you meet these requirements? And again, I have a video that walks you through whether your parents can claim you as a dependent or not. That's going to be the thing that dictates whether the parent can claim you or whether you can claim yourself, and that dictates who's going to be getting the tax credit, assuming that they qualify for the tax credit. Okay, let's now look at the rest of this form here. So what we have here is Form 1. This is going to be our qualifying educational expenses. Now, in the fact pattern I provided you, I think I said it was $8,500 is what we had, but there's a $500 refund back on part of it. So really it was a net of $8,000. That's why you're seeing $8,000 over here, okay? So you probably aren't going to ever see anything in the box 2 or box 3. There's kind of there. Box 4, what we look at, that is going to be as if there's been adjustments made for a prior year. So if there's some kind of adjustment, you can see an amount there. Most times you're not going to have anything in that box. Box number 5 over here, what we're looking at is we are looking at scholarships. So when you're looking at qualifying educational expenses, scholarships reduce that, right? So when we're looking at the tax credits, what happens is we say, well, here's what your expenses were, and then you had your scholarships that actually cover that. You didn't actually pay for that amount. So what you really have is a difference between the two of $5,000. Now, we're going to see that when we get to the American Opportunity Tax Credit in the next video that is capped at $4,000, but that's what we would have dealt with. Had we gone $8,000 and then our scholarship's been $7,000, only $1,000 could qualify you for a tax credit, okay? Because you only had $1,000 of qualifying educational expenses, assuming those were your only qualifying educational expenses that are now appearing on this 1098. Okay, but again, you might have had books or something else that could have added to that cost. So that's what you would be looking at as well. Now, what you'll also see on here, and I'm going to increase this over here, is you're going to also see a couple other boxes over here, right? Check if at least half-time. Well, that's going to be super important for us because we have to at least be half-time in order to qualify for the American Opportunity Tax Credit. So the IRS is going to want to know that. Check if you're a graduate student. If you were a graduate student, then you're not going to be eligible for the American Opportunity Tax Credit. You could do the Lifetime Learning Credit, but you wouldn't get the American Opportunity Tax Credit. And then over here, you can see that it says for box number 7, check if it includes the amount for the next semester, right? For the spring semester. So the spring 2027 semester. So it wants to know, okay, well, check for that amount. Check if it includes that. So this would be a situation to where you may have paid the tuition in December 2026 for the spring 2027 semester. Because remember, this is done in an academic year setting. So you're going to go ahead and check this so that way they know, okay, hey, that's being included in the specific year. So next year, you know, it shouldn't include that amount. So that's kind of what they're looking at in this situation. So that's what the box there is for. Adjustments, I think I already mentioned that. That's generally going to be 0, as is 10. That deals with the insurance component of it. All right. So that's your basic issues when you're looking at a 1098-T. Those are the things that you're generally looking at. Now, the big thing is, well, what happens here? What are we doing with this? So I'm just going to show you briefly what it's going to look like when you go over to the 8863. So you can see a little bit of that, but we will do a complete walkthrough of the 1098T to the 8863 to Schedule 3 to the 1040. So that way you're going to be able to go ahead, if you're trying to do your taxes, you can just follow this all the way through. So that way you can figure out where it's at. And you know what, if you're using a tax system, hey, that doesn't matter either, because what you're going to be able to do is you're going to be able to go through and you're going to be able to trace those dollar amounts back. So if you're trying to make sure that you understand your tax return or how to do tax planning in the future, you can take a look at your tax return and you're going to know where those numbers are coming from. So it's really helpful to understand how your taxes are being applied. Hey, before I go on to the 8863, I do want to ask if this video has been helpful for you. Remember, go ahead and subscribe to this channel. I have playlists on the entire 1040 line by line. So anything as you're working on taxes, you're going to have that. I'm doing playlists that deal with different life events, including if you're looking at starting college, or if you're starting your first job, having a child, getting married, getting divorced, whatever the scenarios may be. I have different playlists that's going to help you so that way you stay current with the tax law and you understand how to actually complete your taxes and the impact on your taxes. Okay, let's go ahead and let's take a brief look at the 8863 and then we'll wrap up this video and then I'll do you a full walkthrough of the 1098 with the schedule 8863 and the schedule 3. All right, let's briefly go ahead and take a look at the 8863. Now I'm only looking at part 3. What's going to happen in the full walkthrough is I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to do part 3, which we have to do first. That way we can get back up to part 1 and we can fill out part 1. But basically what you're doing is you're putting this initial information and the screening questions that you need to know on here as well. So we're going to start out here and you can see it says the student's name. The reason it has a student's name is this may or may not be the taxpayer who's actually going to be claiming these tax credits, right? So what 8863 does is this is a form that we're using to determine whether we're going to get the American Opportunity Tax Credit or the Lifetime Learning Credit, and it's telling us how much we're going to actually get. So that's what this whole form is designed for. So we have our student's name up here. Then we're going to have the academic institution. Sometimes people are attending more than one university or whatever. So we're going to go ahead. We're putting our information in here. I only gave you one situation. And I have the situation in this one to where the student is not being claimed as a dependent for whatever reason. So we're going to go ahead and just take this from the perspective of the student, although it's the same rules when we're dealing with the parents as far as how we're filling this out. So as we go through here, you can see it starts to ask you specific types of questions. Are they at least half time? Yes or no, right? I skipped another one up here. Have they already used the American Opportunity Tax Credit for the previous 4 years? Because you only have a 4-year limitation. So it's saying yes or no. And then if the answer is yes, right, then what it wants us to do is it wants us to proceed to the next one. If it's no, it's telling us go straight over to 31 because we're not going to qualify for the American Opportunity Tax Credit. So that's why it's going through these initial screening questions to see if we qualify. Then you can see, okay, well, if it sent us over to line 31 would take us straight over to the Lifetime Learning Credit, right? Well, we were going through and we were saying yes on all these. So we're looking at the American Opportunity Tax Credit. Now, all things equal, American Opportunity Tax Credit is far better than the Lifetime Learning Credit, although it's much more restricted than the Lifetime Learning Credit. So if you've been convicted of drugs before, then you can't get the American Opportunity Tax Credit. If you've already completed your first 4 years of university, you can't go ahead and do it. So as a graduate student, you're not going to be able to qualify for the American Opportunity Tax Credit, those types of situations. All right. Well, and then the American Opportunity Tax Credit is also partially refundable, which we absolutely love because that can create that refund for us, right? Okay, so what we would then do is we would start taking the amounts from over on our 1098, and that's going to start coming in here to where we're going to start to replace the amounts in here, right? The $8,000 and whatnot, the scholarships and those different areas of it. So we can figure out, well, how much are we going to get? Now you can see where we started out with line 27 is $4,000. Well, why $4,000? Remember, we had $8,000 on the 1098, and then we had $3,000 in scholarships. It's $5,000. But under the American Opportunity Tax Credit, the maximum amount that we start out with is $4,000. So it's the first $4,000 of tuition, and then it's going to be reduced from there. But what we have is $4,000. We can't use all $5,000. Had we had $6,000 of scholarships and $8,000 of our qualifying expenses, we would have been down to $2,000. So we would have put $2,000 because that is less than the $4,000, right? So $4,000 is the ceiling, it's not the floor. Okay, so that's kind of one of the important things to know as you're going through this process as well. Hey, there's one other thing I do want to mention with this when we're looking at the 1098 and then we're trying to figure all this other stuff out. I do want you to know that just because you have qualifying tuition expenses or educational expenses, it doesn't mean that you're going to get a tax credit, right? Because if your scholarships are greater than your expenses, not only are you not going to qualify for this tax credit because you're not actually paying out of pocket on it, one of the things that's going to happen is you might actually be having to pay taxes on the excess amount depending on the terms of the scholarship and how it was being used. So you may actually have to pay taxes on it, so it may appear on your 1040 as taxable income. All right, hey, thank you so much for watching this video. I will go ahead and record the walkthrough of the 1098 so you can see exactly how things are going from the 1098 to the entire 8863, and then I'll kind of show you how it would get over to our Schedule 3 and then over to the 1040 on that. All right, thanks again for watching. Remember to subscribe, and good luck as you're working on your taxes.